Okay, welcome back. We are in late February 1853, exactly where we last left off. And let's have a quick appraisal of the situation before we pass turn then. So, Omar Pasha, in I think what was the 700th Battle of Plevna, defeated the Russian field force outside the city, which has kind of fallen back into Agosta. Now, it looks to me like a large part of the Russian command is not visible to us. I don't know where it is. But whatever happened, this Russian force fell back into kind of reserves moving north from Sofia, which had been besieging Sofia, and they're now sitting tight. Those forces combined look like they're in slightly better shape than we are, basically. Omar Pasha conducted a 15-day march or 14-day march, then engaged in a massive action at the end of it. And when he left Constanta, it was in pretty heavy snow, and then the entire march was torrential rain. So it's been very, very quickly this is disorganized his army. We're going to sit tight in defensive posture outside Plevna, besieging the city. This is their only depot in the Balkans. Their army once again looks like it's very low on supply. They would have used, that was 3 rounds of combat. That was a fairly big action. They fought outside Plevna, once again unsuccessful for them. It feels like we're kind of, again, like for nearly 11 months now, I've been kind of, winning the battles but losing the war. Not really losing the war, we're fighting on our territory. We're fighting a defensive war. And what we want to really do is for these kind of victories to translate into something more concrete strategically, which is to say we want to wrap up the deal in the Balkans, and that will involve engaging them in a really decisive action. And we could be close to that moment. So we want to deprive them of a source of supply. Omar's going to sit tight. We're going to hold at all costs. This is the risky moment. It's a little bit of a dicey moment, this, because if the Russians push hard, go all in to try and lift the siege at Plevna, they engage us in the field again. It's a kind of Ludogoria, which is the kind of the area outside the town, if you like. Then it's going to be touch and go. It will be a touch and go fight. Now, it depends how long it will take them to march. They're going to be crossing a river. It's heavy rain in Agosta and also rain in Plevna. And they're crossing a river, which gives us a bit of an advantage. The difference between our forces doesn't seem to be much, but again, we can only see a portion of the Russian command by the looks of it, unless a large part of that Russian army in Plevna just dissolved. I thought that once before, of course, after Omar Pasha's kind of early move, as he was a kind of a junior officer, but then that kind of force cropped back up, besieging Plevna. So anyway, we don't know where it is, but they don't have a depot, and we kind of can, we now have this town surrounded. So it is going to be critical for them to either lift the siege here or make a play for Sofia, which is another depot. What we are going to do is at this point release the reserve army corps sitting in Adrianople. There's no point having, how many is it? 27,000 men sitting there doing absolutely nothing. And given that we do need a bit more muscle up here, it's going to take a bit of time. We're going to use riverine points, which I didn't realize we actually had enough to lift an entire army corps, but we do just about. 4 days, and then we're going to be, it's going to take him 18 days, or him, that force 18 days in total. The idea being is we're going to relieve one of these cavalry divisions of a commander, convert that cavalry division into an independent division within Omar Pasha's army, and then use the commander to take command of the reserve army corps, which will sit tight in Plevna, keep the city encircled, and hopefully that gives basically Omar Pasha a month sitting on a defensive posture to get his organisation up to scratch. It is going to be tough because he's sitting outside, a town, besieging it in heavy weather. He doesn't have any shelter or anything like that, but that will beef up our kind of military muscle in the region generally anyway, and give him enough time to recover for us then to conduct further operations and ultimately to kind of like clear up this mess, really. I mean, the idea is if we can engage and destroy the Russian command in the field, then ultimately we will just detach a cavalry division basically and move that cavalry division up here and kind of wrap that up, and then begin to look at operations against Russia. Maybe look to kind of try and deprive them of a depot or something like that, and kind of bring the war into their soil, basically make them decidedly less comfortable than they are at the moment in the war. In the east then, Hussein Avni did move into Bitlis. There was no engagement there. We don't know why. It may just be extreme weather. His force is quite tired. It was only a 9-day march from what I recall. Irritatingly, Mehmed Rashid, our new Lieutenant General, folded into Hussein Avni's command. That wasn't intentional. He's going to head back up north and join Reza Pasha. We're releasing the Independent Artillery Regiment. That's going to be heading east. That's comprised of 2 battalions. It's going to take 24 days, and that's going to hook up with Reza Pasha and provide him with a bit more firepower. In terms of battles, we kind of already went through all the battles and all the kind of major actions. The situation in Libya is now stable. We've obviously dealt with a colonial revolt, or revolt stroke insurgency from the hinterland, heading towards Tripoli, using the division that we have based there. That's a done deal. And then we've got kind of 2 brigades, 1 infantry, 1 light cavalry brigade. That's kind of salvaged the situation in Cyrenaica. And in the south, in Aden, this is it. This is rolling the dice, really. We're kind of sallying the kind of field force that we had. We are actually adding a militia brigade, which we had sitting inside the kind of colonial fort in Sana'a, and we're going to be looking to try and lift the siege on Sana'a, engage the Yemeni forces there. We don't have much in the way of supplies now, but we do have a bit of ammunition, and hopefully we have enough to kind of seal the deal. And if it's convincing enough, we might then be able to move into Hodeida, lift the siege at Hodeida. But this force has been accompanied by an additional revolt. They're just continuously accumulating forces here, so this is getting harder and harder and harder. And I'm thinking what we really need to do now is to kind of look for a way of getting out, actually, until we can basically relieve commanders from their commands in the north, obviously, which is much more pressing and important. We can't really have. The main issue is that with really small forces, the command penalty doesn't matter too much. Once you have larger and larger forces, the command penalty becomes much more pronounced. So a brigade, for example, it doesn't matter if a brigade doesn't have a commander. It doesn't really matter at all. It doesn't affect it a huge amount. In fact, this is a division, so it's a bad example. And you can see here, this is a really good example. It's the smaller the force, the less kind of important it is that it has a kind of, if you like, a specialized field commander. This is a Marine brigade and has a higher combat value than a cavalry division. A cavalry division has, 3,000 odd men. A brigade, okay, it's a bad example because it's an infantry brigade. Infantry brigades tend to be more personnel heavy. But anyway, smaller forces, it matters less, essentially. The smaller the force. That said, it still makes sense to have a bit of force concentration here, because that's kind of what they've done also with mixed forces. That's pretty much it. In terms of our turn, that is it. The only other thing that we are going to do is to build an additional manufactory. The Industrial Revolution is well underway in Constantinople. We've just finished building our shipbuilding plant. We've built a textile workshop. We've got not an industrial enterprise, but a military significant fort upgrade in Constantinople is nearing completion. We have an additional textile manufactory and manufactured goods shop. We're going to build an additional manufactured goods shop. Before we look into specialization, we want to get the kind of core of an industrial economy squared away, really, and that's going to be manufactured goods shop. That's 857 capital. We've got just under 1,200, 31 manufactured goods, 10 coal, 31 steel, and that is well within what we have the capacity to provide. So you can see now that, nearly more than a third of the kind of manufactories, or a large part of them, in fact, nearly half of them, the actual manufactories are being constructed in Constantinople. Once we have railroad, Constantinople is the largest non-industrial city by far. It's bigger than Beijing, So yeah, we start off with a really large city. It makes sense for us to kind of tap that large population to focus our industrial development on that city to begin with. Anyway. That's it. Our exports are set. The fleet is heading back to Constantinople for some supplies, for some rest and leave. We've got the kind of raiding fleet in the central med. Nothing engaged, nothing spotted. It's hit and miss. We know that from 11 months of warfare. It's going to be hit and miss in terms of, they might see something and kind of engage it in a run of kind of battles throughout the next fortnight. They might see nothing at all for 6 months. That's the way it is. In terms of our moves, that's it. There is nothing else really to consider. Let's just check very quickly, make sure that our assets balance is sound. It is. We've got everything squared away in terms of exports. Yeah, that's good. So we're good to roll. We're going to head now into early March and see how it goes. We obviously had a late start to the kind of yeah, late old start to the winter, so we'll see if that has any kind of bearing on how much the kind of heavy weather lingers. Maybe it ends up being a really wet, you know, may not be. It may be the case that March things dry up really, really quickly. It might just be one of those winters that's kind of quite short. It's been quite severe in a lot of ways. I mean, it started very late, and then, you know, within kind of a period of 2-3 weeks, most of Anatolia was blanketed in snow. But I mean, despite the fact that it hasn't been the war season, we have been engaged in almost constant fighting, really. Perhaps not quite as sort of much less movement. You know, organisation and cohesion and morale is much more of a feature of winter warfare. But we've kept the pressure up on the Russians, I think, is the main thing. The upset from in the late summer, the fall of Sofia and the kind of Sofia screw job, it's been reversed. They might take Sofia again. If they do, we'll roll with it in the last analysis. But we need to keep a kind of careful eye on our national morale, and that's going to be the biting point, really. We're 11 months into the war now. I don't know. I'm not one of these people that kind of reads scripts in game so they kind of know. You know, I try and rely a little bit on a reasonable knowledge of history, and I tend to play factions that I'm interested in their history, so that I can kind of get a bit of a feeling for what might be coming up, kind of thing. But I don't want to know mechanically what the criteria for this or that is. I don't like playing the system. There's kind of no point, you know, kind of no sort of point playing, really, if you're going to do that. So I've not read. I don't know how, you know, what the Ottoman Empire scripted events are. I mean, I knew that the Crimean War was one of them. I know it has other wars in its history. I know that there's a war in the sort of 1870s against Russia. In terms of the criteria for winning, I mean, the assumption is the game is going to map it as fairly realistic. So my assumption here is going to be the British and the French are going to kind of call the shots. We're not going to get much out of, you know, winning a war against Russia in reality, other than prestige. You know, we've got a lot of prestige from these pitched battles. They haven't been unnoticed. You know, our prestige is almost neck and neck with Prussia now. So even though we're a backward, poor, undeveloped, you know, only just beginning to industrialize society, you know, we're held in high regard by the great powers. Okay, we're the sick man of Europe, but we've got a sprawling transcontinental empire, and we're not in the worst shape. You know, like there are signs that we're modernizing since 1839. Excuse me, we have the beginning of the Tanzimat period, and yeah, we're not in the worst shape at all. In terms of how the war ends, a part of me thinks it's a bit early for us to be thinking about this. Like, wars do feel long in this game. Very, very quickly, you're fighting for 11 months or a year, and it feels like you've been fighting for a decade. You kind of feel like, you know, the war was as long as the rest of the game combined. And when you're at peace for a prolonged period of time, you start hankering for a bit of a fight. And I suppose that's because you have all these armies, these toys, these tools that you're kind of developing. You're seeing all this technology, you know, and you start thinking, I want to use these things. You know, I want to kind of start advancing my interests and this sort of thing. I think with the Ottomans, the truth is, by and large, the wars will come to us, you know, and yeah, they'll come to us. In terms of how this war ends, we could easily be looking at another 2 or 3 years of war. I think that I would guess the way the scripting is going to work is going to be based on national morale. If we can get Russian national morale low enough, get them to kind of enter into a point of crisis on the basis of defeating their armies, possibly on the basis of some fairly limited kind of actions in southern Russia against Odessa, against Erzurum, you know, in the southern Caucasus, then this will probably trigger the, I don't know what, Paris Peace Conference, the London Peace Conference, whatever the peace conference was, that ended the Crimean War, and it will probably result in a prestige loss for Russia and a prestige gain for us, France, and the UK, and probably some things like transit rights. We'll have temporary transit, military transit rights in Russia, and this sort of thing. But we do need to start thinking really carefully ahead as well. Once the war's over, Britain and France will probably cut us loose. You know, their interest in us was really merely, it was predicated on their interest in containing Russia, really. You know, they have no kind of real soft spot for us. And once they cut us loose, Russia will probably be in a bit of a weak position. It will have been humiliated. Its armed forces will have sustained damage. It's still involved in a squabble against Sweden. And they will also have a peace deal with us, for a period of time. But there will be other countries looking at us. Austria, of course, I think is we need to keep a really careful eye on Austria. They might look to move straight away. That would be unfortunate if it happens. It will feel like the never-ending war. But there will be prolonged periods of peace, 5-10 years sometimes, where just nothing happens. And in a weird way, we should relish that when it happens as well. These are the periods where we can focus on sustained economic development. And of course, if wars are fought in our territory, it does affect the economy. It's not as calamitous as kind of mid-20th century wars, you know, or anything like that. 19th century wars are comparatively leisurely. I mean, I remember in when this war started, I was like, oh, they're very slow, leisurely affairs, and then actually I was really rather surprised at just how fast and violent the war was. And sometimes it's like that. Like each time you play is a bit different. But yeah, Austria will have to keep a careful eye on. You know, they do have an interest. That is such a touch. That's really good news. Equal kind of even Stevens, really in terms of casualties, but that should hopefully result in them falling back at the very least and giving us again a little bit of breathing space. Okay, it looks like we've spotted something in the central med, day 4. Now my calculation is going to be 4 or 5 days for the Russians. Okay, what's that? That's a really small force. Expeditionary Cavalry Regiment. God knows what that means, but there's no losses. Looks like whatever it was, okay. It's that line brigade that was with that division. Whatever it was, they just basically broke off straight away. Okay, Krasnov's force. That's all he has left. 1,000 men, yeah, so he suffered heavy losses. Really, really heavy attrition. There's a cavalry division, basically, that's kind of, by the looks of it, to a large extent, wasted away. Krasnov kind of overplayed his hand, got himself trapped in the sort of mountain. Yeah, and he's just getting whittled away now. Okay, I'll keep an eye on that. No, looks like Krasnov's slipping through, possibly. No big action outside Plevna, though. That's the key thing. That said, we're set to a defensive posture. We have to bear in mind that does essentially mean that Russian forces can slip through. At this stage, I don't mind that. As long as we're winning the kind of big field engagements, we take Plevna back. Maybe not this turn, but obviously when we're in a position to, we might storm it. If we're still there in a month or 2, 3 months or something, we haven't taken it yet, we'll just storm it. There's a relatively modest force defending it, actually. I mean, because no one's really controlled any of these fortresses for very long, the kind of size of the garrison that's been mustered is very kind of modest. So yeah, Plevna's controlled by, I don't know, 20,000, something like that. The reason it was so hard for them to take first time round is because we had a pre-prepared. When I say pre-prepared, we can't take credit for this in terms of gameplay, really. It was something that existed prior to 1850. It had obviously been built up by the Ottomans during the development of the new model army as a kind of linchpin fortress in northern Bulgaria. They had kind of gun emplacements and stuff like that. And so it was an especially tough nut to crack. I mean, it took a toll on the Russians. It inflicted about 60,000 casualties. They launched, as you'll recall, repeated kind of assaults against the fortress. To no good end. Let's have a look then. Okay. Yeah, it's gotten more interesting. Still quite badly disorganised, still besieging. The French have joined us. That is good news indeed. Reserve Corps, 4 days out. Excellent news. Who should we give it to? Selim? Doesn't really matter, does it? Let's give it to Ismail Pasha. Okay. We could even actually switch out one of the army corps that's really disorganised and then just drop Ismail Pasha's new army corps in. That essentially utilises the reserve system, and then keep one of the more tired ones back, because this garrison can't actually. It's a fixed garrison. It's like not a kind of regular field command, so it's not like these boys can kind of like sally out of the city and kind of make a serious play for it. That's good though. That's really important. That means the noose is timed. How the hell have they got supplies? Okay, we can see now the other forces that we kind of defeated. Where are they getting supplies from? Let me check their kind of diplomatic relations. Maybe they're getting something through Austria. Nothing. They've got a commerce agreement and state visiting, but they've got no transit rights. Bewildering. The AI you can't cheat on this either, by the way. I've not got the AI to cheat or anything. It's you can kind of control how much the AI can cheat. Oh, hang on. I didn't realize they just sent a force south. Okay. What is that? A brigade, a very small force. Don't think there's anything to worry about there, really. To tell you the truth, I think it's fairly immaterial. Yeah, I'm not going to overthink that. Okay, because weather... I know it's not so much weather, I think it's increased control over the region. What if we sent him to offensive? He's obviously still activated. Yeah, it'll be a slower process. We'll keep him kind of set to defensive posture, I think. Set to hold at all costs, and same with the reserve corps that we're moving up. Is that a division? Yeah, I say for the time being, no significant move on the Western Front. We'll hold Hussein Avni tight for the time being. Don't even know where we can move to. Weather has got a little bit... Well, let's have a look. I say that, no, it's not really. It's still just snowing in the east. It's early March, though. I mean, the war began... What was it? Late March, isn't it? Late March 52. "22 days. I don't think we can do anything. We have to just sit there, basically. Sit tight. We'll set to a defensive posture, then. Okay, let's drill through our reports really quickly. Russia is missing new state bonds. The battles we've already received live reports for as the turn processed. We don't need to revisit those kind of needlessly. I think the Bashi bazooks to try and deal with this small Russian force that's conducting, it's like an exploration force that's conducting some kind of sort of slightly bewildering guerrilla campaign around Ezra, around the fort at Ezra, just kind of hopping around. Maybe worth moving our kind of just move this brigade around a little bit and see if we can kind of utilize this smaller lighter force. I'm going to try and build a new brigade at some point. Let's just check our inflation and everything. That's fine. Let's just check that very quickly. Okay. Yes, that's Rumelia. They moved a very small force, like a brigade, south of Rumelia. I think that's a distraction. They've taken the town. There's nothing there. They're not going to hold it for very long. Nothing to worry about. Okay, we've got a lot of manufactured goods. We're really starting to hoard manufactured goods now. That's good. There's more of that, the better. We'll stockpile them when we're very close to getting to a position where we can start basically not having to import those anymore and having almost a kind of self-sustaining economy. So, yeah, imports 29 units, 164. Exports 45, 118. Domestic market 63 units of goods for 225. Merchants earn us an extra 5 for transporting goods. Let's see if there's any significant developments. Okay, yeah, so we're offering bribes to local tribesmen in Dubai. We're looking to kind of increase our colonial penetration. It hasn't really worked by the looks of it, which is irritating. We just want to increase it a little bit so we can start looking at really converting this region into a sort of protectorate. As Qatar is, you can see Qatar is militarily controlled by us. It's been converted into a protectorate. No, that's it. That's a wrap. I'm gonna I'll end the video there then. That's one turn. That's late Feb to early March. And in terms of the next turn, what I'll probably do is I'll pass the next turn and I'll load up in late March because we don't have any significant moves. You can see from this that not much flows. The only moves that we've made is pretty much what we've made here. And any others that I decide on the fly to do before I click past turn, I'll keep you in the loop. So you're kind of aware of anything that I've done. But I'll load the game up in late March, which is the next turn from here, and report back. And again, the hope is really that the Russians kind of stay back for the time being. Just give Omar the breathing space. Agosta's heavy rain. How many days march is he? Still 4 days march. That's 4 days in bad weather as well. So he's in a really good position to kind of make a move. I think once we get this reserve corps in place, we'll switch that out with one of the army corps that's a little bit kind of depleted, maybe even the Imperial Guard, because it's sort of the most disorganized, it sustained the heavier losses. We'll switch it out, basically, keep one of the forces back so that Plevna's continuously besieged, and that will provide us, and the general improvement in the organization of Omar's force should provide us with a basis to continue the offensive into Agosta, basically into western kind of Bulgaria. The only place they can really fall back to is Niš, I'm guessing. And yeah, to begin to basically pursue them up towards Sarajevo, bottle them up, and yeah, kind of deal the death blow. Thanks for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one.